I never imagined I would live like this. My family has been wealthy for generations. I was set up by my parents and married a man from a fairly affluent family. While it wasn't a love match, we had a great relationship. We had a son right after we got married, and my husband's business was doing well. Even though he was busy with his business, he spent a lot of time with our son, and we went on numerous trips. Our family albums are filled with photos from our travels. But when our son was in high school, my husband died in an unfortunate accident. The young driver at the time, barely in his 20s, was able to survive. His name was James. James said he would spend the rest of his life making amends for his mistake and promised to stay by my side. I've been living as a widow for 10 years now. My son filled the void left by my husband, who was the most caring and kind man I've met, even though we were set up. My son grew up healthy and intelligent. Thanks to the money my husband had earned, I could support his education without any financial worries. As a parent, you always want your child to grow up well, find a good partner, and have a stable marriage, right? It would have been possible if I just looked at my son, but the harsh judgment towards a single mother hurt me a lot. I told my neighbors that I was lonely. They seemed to comfort me, saying things like, "I understand. Hang in there. My husband is as good as gone." But the rumor that came back to me was that I was a stubborn vixen who lived alone because I couldn't trust men, even though I had a lot of money. I couldn't trust anyone because they hurt my feelings. I was also afraid that my son would get hurt, so I never expressed my opinions. When I tried to have a conversation with the neighbors, my news spread faster than any rumor. Needless to say, I was lonely, and I continued to endure without finding the meaning of life. I live in a neighborhood of single-family houses. My house is a two-story house with a beautifully landscaped garden. Many of the surrounding houses are also owned by wealthy people. One early morning, there was a commotion in front of my house. The lady next door rang my doorbell, saying she had seen her husband talking to me and wanted to talk. I had talked to her husband. It was only for a moment. He had asked me what newspaper I read, and a woman from another house had seen it and told the lady next door. The lady next door can't swallow her food without alcohol. That day, she was drunk again and knocked on my door. I was so surprised that I tried to dismiss her. Even though I spoke kindly to her, she wouldn't leave, so I called James. He quickly took a taxi and came over. That was when I first realized that James was a real man. He wrapped his arm around my trembling shoulders and said, "Ma'am, please go inside," and sat me down on a garden chair. Then he spoke to the lady next door. "Mrs. is not the kind of person to act as thoughtlessly as you," James firmly said. "She's a different breed than an alcoholic like you. Why are you pinning your suspicions and rumors on an innocent person? If you continue to make a scene, I'll call the police, so go back inside now." The neighbor's wife, who had been spreading false rumors about me because I was without a husband, quickly retreated when James showed up. The neighborhood, well aware of the neighbor woman's usual suspicion towards her husband, watched the scene unfold with a resigned expression, then retreated into their homes. Not to brag, but I took after my parents in many ways, especially my slender figure and above-average height for women, and a pretty face that didn't need any plastic surgery. Even without trendy eyebrow tattoos or skincare, I looked 10 years younger than I actually am. Despite all this, There was a lot of gossip about me raising my son alone. They said they couldn't imagine what I was up to when I wasn't with my son. Such words hurt me, so I became more and more depressed, trusting only my son and James. After that incident, I began to feel a new emotion towards James. I felt I should be nicer to him because he stood up for me in the most difficult moment. And although he was much younger than me, I thought he was strong and manly. The business my husband left behind was running smoothly, and the employees who worked with my husband were working diligently, so I didn't have to worry about it. Holding on to the wealth my husband had left, I resisted temptation. When the real estate boom was happening, I thought I should try something too. If my parents gave me good information, I went to see the land with James, who was a chauffeur. James was more careful when driving after my husband's accident. We traveled so much to see the land in the city and in the countryside that sometimes we couldn't return home on the same day. In those cases, we had to sleep in a nearby hotel. We had dinner with James and booked 2 rooms for a good night's sleep. As I spent more days with James, I felt that he was very gentle, responsible, and tight-lipped. You know, chauffeurs tend to know the family affairs of their owners and handle them. I'm not the head of a corporation or anything, but I know a lot of important information. And since I've become averse to interpersonal relationships, James was very careful with his words in front of me. One day, we went to see a good spot in the countryside and had a meal at a nearby restaurant. James didn't drink in front of me, but that day, we decided to leave the car at the accommodation and have a proper drink. James doesn't have parents. He was born to a single mother and left in an orphanage. As soon as he graduated from high school, he became a chauffeur for my husband, and now he's in his 30s. He's a few years older than my son. I've ridden in a car driven by James for a long time, but I haven't had much conversation with him. That's how depressed I was for a long time. But as I traveled around the country and got out more, my mood improved. I felt like I hadn't paid enough attention to James's life. I asked James, "What do you do after work? Do you have a girlfriend?" James shyly lowered his head and said he didn't have a girlfriend. James is tall and handsome. He's always dressed in a suit while driving, but I told him to dress more comfortably. James said that if his attire becomes disheveled, his mind would too. Yes, I must confess, there were more than a couple of times when my heart fluttered at the sight of James in his suit, but I couldn't reveal my feelings outright. One day, when we went to look at land, I decided to confess my feelings. The land we saw that day didn't really appeal to me. I treated James to a nutritious meal. "Did you get tired from driving so much today? The weather's not great. Let's rest for a day before we head back," I said. James went into the motel and booked 2 rooms. I quietly held James's hand and told the counter, "Please give us a large room with 2 beds." James looked taken aback, but went along with my request. And I asked him to bring the shopping bag I had told him to keep in the car. It was the liquor I used to drink when I felt depressed at home. And there were also some side dishes I bought at the department store. I said I'd take a shower first and have a drink. And James excused himself for a moment. I don't know how much care I took in showering that day. I thanked James for driving in such dreadful weather and offered him a drink. As always, James agreed to drink with me. I told him not to be nervous as I had something difficult to say, and to listen to me as if I were his older sister. "James, we're both lonely. How about being my man just for tonight? I asked. James' ears turned red, and he silently replied, "Yes." And so we awkwardly made love. James confessed that he had never had such an experience before at his age. He also confessed that he had been in love with me since the time my husband was alive. He even said he sometimes felt jealous of my husband. He said he cried a lot seeing me struggling after my husband passed away, and he decided not to look at other women and stay by my side. He said he couldn't stand it when I was being harassed by the neighbor man that early morning, and that's why he wanted to become my man. Hearing James's words, I was so touched that we made love again. The next day, we returned home in a good mood, and the way we addressed each other changed to honey. Of course, we were careful when my son and daughter-in-law were around. My son's wife looked at my face and asked if something good had happened, and if we had made a deal on the land. I just smiled in response. After that, I put a more comfortable mattress in James's room at my house so he could rest without getting tired. On days when my son and daughter-in-law don't visit, we make love whenever we get a chance in James's room. Nothing changed about James, but I started feeling strangely jealous whenever my daughter-in-law spoke a word with James. However, it didn't seem like they had anything going on. I planned to openly reveal my relationship with James to my son and daughter-in-law and register our marriage with James. It's my turn to repay James, who has waited and trusted me. Despite our almost 20-year age difference, I plan to support whatever James wants to learn. I have no regrets about James. Although I can't have a child with James, I want to spend the rest of my life loving him. I am desperate to spend the rest of my life happily with James, regardless of what people say. My wish isn't too much, is it?